Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome. This is our first edition in Water New Zealand's podcast series, Toara o Tuwai. But it's our first podcast from the Climate Change Group. I'm John Reid, and I'm part of that group. And with me is group member Hannah Edmond and Fraser Clark from Wellington Water. As I said, this is the first in a series of 4 podcasts, and we're aiming to really look at some of the key issues that the water sector in Aotearoa, New Zealand needs to tackle if we're going to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So we know that we've got huge investment in infrastructure coming, and so that means we've got some crucial opportunities to set in place sort of some pathways and some approaches to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions going forwards. Recently, we produced a guide through the Climate Change Group called Navigating to Net Zero, Aotearoa's Water Sector Low Carbon Journey, and that helps provide some sort of practical answers and approaches to try and meet our net zero carbon emission targets. So this is the first of 4 episodes, and we're going to be discussing the journey and context for carbon emission targets and the importance of developing a baseline forecasting and bringing some examples to bear, as well as what's being done by some organisations practically, both here in New Zealand and overseas. So today, Hannah and I are joined by Fraser Clark of Wellington Water, and we're going to be talking about the roadmap that Wellington Water has developed.
Morning, Fraser. It's great to have you here. So I guess opening up today, can you tell us about your roadmap to net zero project and what this is, what it's all about?
The roadmap for us was about taking the work that we'd initially done to understand what our emissions profile looked like. So we completed our original inventory back in about 2019-20, and about the, in line with the navigating to zero approach. You need to understand where our emissions were occurring to understand what to do about them. But then found it a bit more challenging to discuss, well, what are we going to do about reducing those emissions? What are the interventions we need to take, and what the best opportunities to follow are? So we the roadmap was about we updated our emissions inventory, and then was a chance to say, well, what are the big actions we could take? Understanding that inventory, what are the actions we could take to reduce our emissions down, either in line with New Zealand's 2050 targets, or even beyond that, to get really down to net zero. What's the opportunity? Knowing then that gave us something that we could use to plan investments, to talk to our owners about investment requirements, to work into the business to see what the opportunities were and see how they could be realised. So it's a chance to build on that base understanding of what the emissions are, to think, well, what are we going to do about it, and then be able to have a really good discussion about what it takes to get there.
Cool. And so you started with the inventory, which was something that you guys already had in place?
We first looked at that, I think it was in 2019 or 2020. We took our 2017, 18 years data, applied in line with the approach set out in navigating to zero. We've applied the greenhouse gas protocol, looked across all of our emissions to see what was happening. We updated that a couple of years later when the changes were made to the way that measurement of wastewater treatment emissions were discussed. So we incorporated those, and then that gave us a good understanding. But we thought we'd update them before going into the roadmap, knowing things had changed in that time. Further changes to the way wastewater treatment emissions were measured, including the Water New Zealand guidelines, changes in our demand, and a bit of more information that we had. So yeah, it all starts from understanding those emissions, that whole you can't manage what you don't measure story.
Which is a real strong story at the moment, where people don't know where to start, really. And then taking that, then how far into the future have you actually gone with this?
The roadmap looks at projections out to 2050. So we took that inventory, tried to understand linkages to growth. So over that same period to 2050, the region's currently forecasting quite significant growth. I think it's in the order of 35% population growth. So with that comes an increase in the demand for our services. So we needed to sort of project forward what would happen with those emissions, and then from that then say, well, some of them are quite proportional to demand, some of them less so, but what does that look like? And then what are the big steps we can take to reduce those down again? If we don't do anything different, our emissions continue to rise through to 2050, and that's obviously not a story that's going to work. We need to be starting to take action straight away, and certainly not making things worse.
That sounds like a really important piece of the puzzle. So in terms of what you've allowed for in there, you've talked about lots of different things. Have you allowed for external changes as well through to 2050?
Yeah, so there's part of that was the big one is around electricity. So the expectation that New Zealand's electricity supply, grid supplied electricity, will become more renewable over time. So that was included in there as it does make an interesting discussion that we can probably come back to around what's our role in contributing to renewable electricity. And then we also considered other factors. Some of our emissions are associated with water demand. So if we can reduce our water demand through, say, reducing loss and reducing consumption, then that can also have an impact. So some of those factors were played through into that thinking as well.
It's a complex mix of different influences, isn't it? From external and internal, that I guess trying to come up with a roadmap helps people to visualize what that future looks like. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and what we did working together with the team at Mott McDonald was to look at a couple of different scenarios there. So we said, well, one, if we applied everything that we know can be applied today, where would that get to? And the other one was to say, if we pushed into every conceivable area, what sort of reduction would we get down to? And the first one said we could probably get about a 50% reduction, and the other one, by just having that really resolute focus, we could probably get down to 90% reduction from where we would otherwise have been. So again, that gives us a different way of thinking about our approach. Do we just want to do what's known, or do we really want to focus on it and knowing that there's real outcomes to achieve at the end of it either way?
Thanks, Fraser. That's really interesting. What I'd be really interested in hearing about is what the driver is from Wellington Water to sort of make this investment in the roadmap and planning your carbon future.
Yeah, well, I think from a business perspective, you're not going to find a more climate dependent business than a company in the water services sector. So how we take our water and where we take our water and where we return the water back is all influenced by climate. How much water people use, also climate impacts. So if we're not taking action to ensure to look after the water and to look after the climate, then our services are going to be reduced over time. Beyond that, for our owners, most of our council owners have also aware and live to the issue of climate change. A few of them have declared climate emergencies. A few of them have emissions reduction targets. So a bit of an expectation from them that we'll also be taking action to help the councils and the region reduce their emissions. So it's kind of an interest from all fronts. So from our point of view, as we work with our councils, we've also agreed that reducing emissions is one of our key strategic focus areas for investment. And as we've worked through investment with them over into the last long-term plan period and into the coming long-term plan period, we've been giving them advice around investment requirements for them to consider alongside investment in other areas.
Yeah, so it goes sort of hand in hand with the council plans. How do you think that might be applicable to other councils, other water supply organisations around New Zealand? Can they apply any of those lessons as well?
I think so, because I think what we've found is that our emissions make up a reasonable proportion of our council owners' emissions profile. And I know for a few of our councils, waste disposal is one of their biggest source of emissions, and then through us disposing of wastewater biosolids to landfill is a big part of that story as well. Equally, in the story in terms of climate resilience, every one of these, all of our councils are going to be impacted by climate change to greater or lesser degree. So thinking about your emissions, thinking about your resilience. That's all part of the story for every one of our, every water services entity sitting within council. I think, and I guess it's not just about the big councils. If I think of South Wairarapa Council, who we've been looking after for the last couple of years, emissions from water services, especially the emissions from wastewater treatment processes, I think was their highest potential emission source. So it's definitely part of the story. It doesn't matter how big or small you are.
Yeah, and I think that's it's a really good response. It's a strong message, isn't it, across the whole sector that we all need to be focusing on this, and this is a really key part of what we do. One of the things that you hear quite often is that we've all got these wonderful visions, but what are the challenges around it? Because there are always challenges that come up, and sometimes those blockers can be the things that are stumbling blocks for people. So I'd be really interested, Fraser, to hear on what the biggest challenges you guys have faced and kind of how you've overcome them.
Well, I think I can probably think of sort of three main challenges in there. One was being able to articulate the story of emissions reduction. So it's also very well for us to say we've got these emissions and we need to reduce them. But at first I didn't have a story to be able to say they're in, well, we knew where they were, but we didn't know in what order we should attack them and what was involved in the investment. We had some intuitive idea that we tried to deal with earlier, but by developing the roadmap, that means we've got a story that we can put in front of people to say it's these things in this order and in this scale and this nature of investment. So it's a much better story for us to be able to tell now, and that's the story we're looking to take into 2024 to 2034 investment planning. If you want to act on climate, we know what it takes, and here it is. Beyond that, sort of back to some of the challenges around dealing with climate change more generally. So a challenge for us in our model, we've got these emissions that we've looked at across our owners and around our owners' assets, but how do we find a way through that sets a target that looks at them holistically when they're still owned and operated individually? So there's the kind of, how do you play out a single story across 6 different owners with different appetite for investment, different ability to invest in different. So that one's been a bit of a challenge. Probably the biggest challenge we've got is the broader context that we're operating in. We've got a legacy of underinvestment in the services that we're trying to grapple with at the same time that we're trying to make these transformative changes into reducing emissions, improving the quality of fresh water. We're also trying to still enable growth. And so there's quite a big investment need that we're facing to deliver the services, and trying to position the need to act on climate into that story can be quite challenging when you've got to deal with catching up on renewals just to deliver the basic services, let alone take the step to do something different, necessary and different. And I think for us, that's going to be about trying to play some of that emissions story into some of those areas as well. So how do we know that there's a link between our emissions and our water use. So through renewals and other activities to reduce water loss and reduce water demand, less water to pump, less water to treat, so less emissions. So we're going to have to find some of those as well, and also in that story, more water in the river. So we need to find a way of seeing all of those benefits together. Just makes those investments even stronger, but it might make things a bit more challenging around big investments. Sludge minimisation, for example, is probably, but there are other factors that play outside of water that might influence that one, for example, around back to carbon and waste minimisation. So it's about us finding sweet spots, where we get multiple benefits from investment, including the carbon reduction, and continuing just to play that story of the need for a reduction, and we know what they are around these around some of the other areas.
So I'm understanding there that you're looking at kind of building carbon into those business plans as you're going forward to try and start integrating that look. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I think there's still early days for us, I think, but around things like renewals, we should be able to get to a point where we're prioritising renewals to reduce water loss And as a benefit of that, we'll get some carbon savings, and also hopefully we'll renew them in a way that we take a low carbon approach to to building some of these assets into the future as well. So it's probably in the way we do our investment prioritisation to make sure that we're really, in providing investment advice to our owners, to our owner councils, that we're really able to sell a good story around the investment benefits.
And the really interesting part I find from what you're saying there is that that's about whole life cycle. And so this roadmap is kind of appreciating both that you've got those capital emissions that are what you're putting in the ground and the works that you're physically doing for the renewals, but you're also actually talking about what those long-term savings are with leakage and with operations of pumps and things like that. So it's that full life cycle.
Yeah, I mean, that's the, have to see that opportunity, as you say, all the way that whole life cycle. There's opportunities in what we build and how we build to reduce emissions directly from reducing steel and carbon and energy, but potentially the bigger opportunity is around the emissions that are created through then operating those assets into the future. And we need to start understanding that story, and that will that's important from the industry and other factors as well. The industry, we've always struggled around having enough OPEX. So if we're thinking, if we're reducing our carbon, we're probably reducing our energy and materials demand, and so we should be reducing cost as well. So we've got to win across all of those spectrums if we're thinking about that whole of life approach and not just trying to build the cheapest thing up front.
That's really fascinating, Fraser. Do you have any sort of key takeaways that you would share from the work that you've been doing, whether that's, say, the clearest opportunities for reductions in carbon, or some of the lessons that you've learned just about getting the organisation behind carbon reduction opportunities?
There's probably endless sort of things we've learned along the way, but I think as put out and set out and navigated to zero, just even understanding what those emissions are is a pretty powerful step. That otherwise we probably know roughly what they are, but not exactly. And so there's that chance to really understand scale and opportunity. That means that you can have a discussion that you wouldn't otherwise have. I think the roadmap's been, it's still, we're really only just starting to look at applying it. But again, having a story that it's harder to shy away from action if you can tell people that there's a pathway there, that what actions are required. It becomes a bit, you're more able to have that conversation and have a discussion around what things might take. There's lots of opportunity for us as a sector to try and solve, find opportunities and find solutions. I think in that wastewater treatment area in particular, if I look, a big emissions challenge for us, biosolids that at the moment are going to landfill, and that's just ridiculous that this potentially high value material, nutrient rich, energy rich, and we're sticking it in the ground and it's turning into methane, and maybe we're capturing a little bit if we're lucky, if it, depending which landfill it's gone into. And that there's an opportunity, but I think it's going to act on that one. We're doing some work now to take a more circular economy approach and a more customer driven, who wants these nutrients, who wants this energy, and in what form, that we can start to work our way back to what the technology solution looks like. But probably in that, there's going to be some hurdles that we're going to need to deal with around customer perception, for example, or growing markets and opportunity that we probably need to work at as a sector. Wastewater treatment emissions, really, you can see people starting to think about that more. Work going on in Australia, Chris and the team at Watercare doing some measurement to try and really understanding the complexity, but the opportunity that the more of us that are starting to follow that lead, take some measurements, understand what there are opportunities to reduce emissions, and sharing that knowledge means that stuff that we can hand on to each other. No one's competing with each other in this space. Other areas where we can think about we talked before about renewable electricity, or briefly about that. What's going to just happen naturally around us, large generators building big solar farms and wind farms, but probably to get to that 100% renewables target means all the good opportunities need to be captured, and some of those might be sitting within the water sector. Well, we've got some small hydro generation going on within our water treatment facilities. Maybe there's some more opportunity there. Plenty of land area to do some solar, possibly some biogas opportunity around biosolids. What's the opportunity in this space? We've got all this other investment that we need. Should we be investing in renewable generation? Or maybe not, but maybe we've got a way to partner with people that are in that space, because there's all sorts of opportunities around energy for the sector, around as well as generation, but participating in reserves markets and demand response that we should be looking to work into and contributing in that area as well. And that might be through partnering with people that are more active in that space.
Yeah, and just sort of picking up on your point of that sort of scale, I think, do you think there are any particular opportunities or anything we should be looking to try and develop through water reform in this space?
Yeah, I think as these entities, if come together, as economic regulation comes to bear, more and more of an opportunity for us to focus on benchmarking and understanding what good performance looks like. We can see that we've got Tomata Arawai we'll start to ask for information about emissions reduction, potentially Commerce Commission wanting to see what investment activity is going there, especially if it comes through and strategies and the expectations of our customers. And I think just more broadly, as investors and things, we need to, part of this, getting the investment we need is bringing in additional investment into the sector. And as those investors are coming in, they're going to be increasingly wanting to see action on climate change, sustainable approaches. And so I think there'll be an expectation from those investors that the people that they're lending money to are doing things in an efficient, low carbon, climate resilient manner. So it's going to come at us, it's the right thing to do anyway, should be clear, but our economic regulator, our water quality regulator, the people lending us funding, all of this stuff is coming towards us as a we need to be able to demonstrate that we're taking climate action seriously and are able to demonstrate that. So that's the future we're walking towards, and I think we kind of ignore that at our peril.
Well, thanks, Fraser. That's given us all plenty to think about. Some fascinating points you've made, and some real great advice there for the whole of the industry to be picking up on and hopefully applying it in what they're doing.
Yeah, I think there's some really core points in there, and really appreciate that call to arms. We all do need to be taking that big step. We've got to be doing something. So thank you for your time today, Fraser.
Thanks, John and Hannah, for inviting me. It's not an easy journey, but it's a journey we all need to be on, and we're happy to share what we've been learning with the sector as we all move forward.
So just leaves me just to wrap up to say thank you for listening to us on this first of our podcasts on Tawara or Tuwai. Our next one will be in this series about the water sector's navigating to net zero. We'll be looking at how maybe to apply some of these principles at more a project and a program level. So we look forward to you joining us for our next discussion. Thank you.